Hey guys, in this tutorial we're going to be covering Redshift proxies, how to export them, import them, and then scatter them in Maya 2017 using Mash. And so a lot of people like using instances, and they work up to a point. Once you start scattering a ton of geometry, you need to start using proxies. The benefits of proxies is that you can limit how they appear in the viewport as bounding boxes or a percentage of points, which lightens up your viewport a lot. So once you have, 30,000 trees or something or more scattered, your viewport will choke and you won't be able to work. And so what this does is it defers it out to render time loading, and so that way your viewport remains really light, and at the same time all the materials are cached out and converted already into something Redshift can work in. And so here's a little render with just a basic HDR of a couple trees, 5 trees. And so just made sure that they're already shaded with Redshift materials and looking okay. And now that that's ready to go, all you have to do is select each of your objects, make sure that they're zeroed out. And the reason you want them to be zeroed out in your scene is because each object needs to be at the 0 point of the entire world. And so 0, 0, 0. Otherwise, if you don't do this and you import the proxy, it'll save the offset distance when you import it in, and that could cause problems. And so now that all the geometry is zeroed out, let's hide a few of these. And I'll show you how to just do one of the trees, but I'm going to end up doing all 5. It's a really quick process, but I'll import all 5 and I'll scatter them in Mash in a new scene. And so now we have our individual object that we're going to export out as a proxy. All you got to do is select the object, go to the top, under Redshift, go to proxy. There's 2 options. There's the create option and the export option. The create option is kind of counterintuitive in the naming convention. It sounds like you're going to actually create the proxy, but what you're actually doing is creating the proxy container. And so this is how you would import the proxy file. And so you want to make sure you click export. Once you're up in export, all you have to do is just find the location where you're going to save it. So I'm going to save it in my assets section, give it a name. And so this is going to be tree number 1. And there's a couple options that you really don't matter unless you have a sequence. So if you have a sequence animation, check that off. Since these are static, we're just going to leave it as is. And all you have to do is just click export selection. And after a couple seconds, it'll mention okay, object whatever was saved to that location. And that's it. That's all there is to it. So I'm going to cut for now. I'm going to export out the other trees, and I'll start a new scene with the terrain that we're going to scatter on using Mash and the Redshift proxies. Hey guys, so here's a new scene that we're going to be importing the proxies into. And I just have a basic terrain, a plane that I just sculpted on with the basic Maya sculpting tools, and just added some variation to the surface. And so now that we have our surface we're going to be scattering on, we need to import the proxies. So under the Redshift tab, click on Proxy, click on Create, and if you click on Create, it'll just give you an empty container. Or if you just click on Proxy and then Create and this little box, this actually lets you find the asset itself before it actually creates the container. You can find it once you have the container open available. And we'll select our first tree, and so it's coming in massive just due to the scale of the terrain. And once you go have your object selected, your Redshift proxy selected, there's a section here where you basically have the option of finding your asset, and so that's what you would have done if you would have just clicked on create by itself. And so right now, due to the naming convention, I actually used doing the numerical ordering of 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3 as I exported these. It's actually being intelligent and thinking that it's a file sequence for an animation, but this isn't actually an animation. So what I'm going to have to do is actually uncheck that and remove the asterisks and just use 0, 1. And so that way it's picking it up individually rather than trying to think it's an animation. And so now that we have that in, you'll notice this is one of the benefits of having a proxy. It comes in as a cube, and this is much lighter than having the full tree geometry on import. So when you have thousands of these scattered, cubes are a lot easier and lighter on your viewport. But Redshift Proxies have the option to click on the preview mesh, and so this will give you 100% display of your geometry if needed. And then you can change this percentage to something a lot lighter. So let's say you only needed 25%. And that's still good enough for you to kind of gauge the geometry itself in case you're moving it around. You need a more accurate view than just a bounding box. And so you can drop this down to 5%. So then it's super light. And once you have the display percentage changed, for our purposes, I'm just going to stick with bounding boxes. I mean, it's fine. Even this can start to slow down once you have thousands of these scattered. So we'll just use bounding box. And beneath this, there's also the materials. So since I saved these out with the materials already in the proxy, we're just going to select from proxy. But you could also get them from your actual scene, and so you basically would tell it that you're going to assign the name of the shaders itself, and you have to match them when you first exported them. So if you build a new shader, you have to make sure that it's the exact same name, and it'll just override the one that was built in. And the override options: object ID, tessellation, displacement, visibility, and matte. These I'll cover individually for other sessions, but basically they do what they do. So object ID, if you need puzzle mats, you would check this off, and it'll basically override whatever you initially created. And tessellation, displacement, this is turning that on also for the object that's in the proxy, whether you need it or not. And same thing with visibility and matte. And so now that we have this in here, let's turn that back on. Let's just keep it at 5%, just so we can scale this down and get an idea of how big we want our little trees to be in the terrain. And so right now, if we keep scaling this down, and the reason I'm actually doing it beneath the terrain is because Mash likes to have the object at your 0 point grid, and so that's here zeroed out. And so let's scale this down. I don't know, maybe this looks pretty good for our scale. Yeah, that should be fine. And so now that we have this in, let's import another 2 proxies. So we'll just create, go to our assets, let's go to number 2. Again, due to the naming convention, it's being confused, so let's put 02 here. And the object's massive, so we'll just match the transforms from the previous one. So in Maya, I believe 2016.5, they added this. I just put it on my polygon bar as a quick button just because I use this a lot to match. But to do this manually, you select your first object, and then this is the object you plan on scaling, and then you select your second object that you're matching from, and so then you go to modify, match transformations, match all, and boom, it just snaps it to the same transforms. And that's why I didn't freeze the first one yet, because I was going to copy these over, just make it easier for me to scale them down. And so again, we're going to just do a preview. Let's stick with 5%. So now we got 2 trees in here. Now we're going to import the third. And again, turn that off. 0, 3. And we'll match second tree. Click on my little shortcut. And now we have 3 trees. We'll just stick to 3 instead of the 5 for now. And we'll do 5%. So now we have 3 trees that we can work with. And we're going to scatter this using Mash. There's different modes of scattering in Maya. You could use scripts. You can use just plain old particle instancing. But nowadays we have Mash, and Mash is just really good at this. It makes it really easy to do. And so what we're going to do is actually open up the Mash editor. And this is new in 2017. It wasn't there before. And so the Mash editor is a little window that just neatly organizes and layers all your Mash nodes. This just makes things a little easier. Before you kind of had to look around in the outliner and figure it out. This is just faster. So with all 3 trees selected, we're going to click on Create Mash Network. You could also do this if you go under the animation section, and there should be Mash up here. And so then there's 3 sections. There's the Mash, Create a Mash Network, the Mash Editor, which is this window, and utilities to convert Mash or connect Mash to end particles and a bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to really cover any of this stuff since there's other tutorials on the web about this. And so we're just going to do a basic scattering. And so we're going to click on Create Mash Network, and we're going to click this little box. And the reason you want to do that is you want to make sure for proxies you don't want to use mesh, because mesh is basically, when you scatter, it's all unique geometry, and proxies aren't going to be doing that. They're all instances, a type of instance. So what we're going to do is click Instance there, and make sure this is selected whenever you plan on scattering with Mash. There was recently a bug where this didn't work in Redshift 2.7. No, yeah, 2.080, somewhere around there. And so it's fixed now, though. And so we'll just click Apply and Close. And so now in the Mash Editor, we have this little window. Let's snap this to the side. And so we have a Mash Distribute. And the Mash Network itself. And what we could do is now we can distribute this. So on X, so now we have 17 trees, right? And you could do whatever, a different amount. There's, like I said, there's other tutorials on all this. We're not going to be dealing with any of this stuff for now. And what we need to do is now connect this scatter system to our geometry that's up here, our terrain. And so underneath the mesh section, you'll have input mesh. And so in here, what you want to do is we'll get this plane, we'll drag that in, and now it'll mention that it's connected. And so now you're seeing your mesh being distributed. So your little proxies are on there. And so what you usually want to do is if you have a map helper, this is if you're going to try to have UVs and stuff like that. And we're not going to deal with a complicated scattering system. This is just going to scatter just generically everywhere. And so now that we have 17, but we're scattering the same exact tree everywhere. And so the reason this is happening is because we haven't created a Mash ID node. And so you got to create one of these, add an ID node. And as you see, each time I add a node, you could turn them off or on. It'll add on to layers of our Mash network. And let's actually snap this off. And so we have the overall section, then we have our Mash ID and our distribute node. And so Mash ID basically just tells it we have 3 objects that are being scattered. And so if you go over here to the side and click on Mash Instancer, you'll see it'll select all the instance objects. And you'll see that we have Redshift Proxy placeholder 1, 2, and 3. And so these are our 3 objects. Let's say you import new objects you want to scatter. You just have to drag them into here. And that's it. It'll just add to them. And so let's get back to the Mash node. So now that we have the 3 different types, let's distribute a huge number on here. I don't know. Let's try 1,700, and the viewport's still chugging along. I could move it around, so it's still handling it. But once we start getting heavier, it will start to slow down. And so this is where the benefit of, instead of using light 5%, we're just going to go with cubes. And so there's actually an option to do this in MASH also, but for now we're going to just start it with our proxies. So let's go to bounding box for all of them. And so that'll just make it even lighter. It's smoother now to use in the viewport. And so we know that each of these cubes represents the trees. And so in MASH Instancer, you actually have the option to do this also. So then underneath level of detail, there's geometry, bounding boxes, and then bounding box. So the difference is, obviously, geometry will show us whatever geometry we have. Bounding boxes, it's just a super light version, basically. All it does is it just turns everything into just one big bounding box. It's invisible. It makes everything invisible, but this is the lightest of them all. Once you have a scatter that you kind of like, it's best to just do this before you start cranking up the amount. And so for now, we'll just stick to geometry. And so we'll go to the distribution node. And now that we're distributing here, we're going to use an up vector. And the reason you do this is because right now the trees are following the curvature of the mountains, as you can see. They're kind of pointing up and sideways, and they're following the normals of the surface. So for trees, we want them to grow straight up, so you want to make sure to use up vector. And that just helps straighten them out a bit. And so now that we have that, there's strength and random rotation, stuff like that we'll actually add. So let's add a little random rotation. And so underneath random, we'll add a random node. And in the random node, we have different options of position, X, Y, Z. For the position, we're going to keep that the same. We don't want to actually change the position. But what we do want to change is the rotation. And so the rotation of the Y. And as you can see, all the cubes are rotating randomly. So we're going to just go 180 so that they're all completely random. And the scaling options can also be changed. And so we're going to keep this uniform. So let's just check off uniform scale. So if I scale random Y to 4, 4, 4, you get all this different variety, right? So there's huge ones, there's a couple smaller ones in there, and but that's too much. Let's actually change that to, I don't know, 1, 1, 1, 1. Just to have a little bit of variety, but it won't be that varying, and that should be pretty good. Yeah, okay, so now we have a little variety on rotation, and the scaling is a little different. So now let's click on the distribute, and this lets you adjust it if you need it to go a little bit higher on the normal, the up vector. So this is if for some reason you want them to point a different direction, you can change this. And see, now everything's kind of laying down, but we want Y to be the up vector. And strength, rotation, scale, 0 scale, strength. Okay, yeah, everything's about right. And okay, now that we've got this scattered around, let's increase the distribution. Let's try 17,000. So now we're getting some really dense stuff, but even then, the viewport's relatively light, and that's just because we're using cubes. Let's go even higher. Let's try, I don't know, just add another 0, why not? See what happens. This is probably going to take a little while. Okay, now we're getting really, really dense. Now the viewport's starting to slow down a bit. But here's the thing about this that makes this great. You now just go to the instance there. Just go to bounding box. And we're back to a little more manageable situation. And so you could use this and add buildings, whatever, and not have to worry about the tree itself, the tree scattering so much. But that's fine. We're not going to do any of that. So we'll see how this looks. So I have, this is going to be a huge amount of geometry. Each tree that I exported as a proxy, I think, was about 900,000 polygons, something like that. So it's pretty heavy. And we're going to just zoom out here. And we're going to start off a Redshift render, see how things work out. So let's just go brute force, brute force. Let's build a basic environment, so a physical sky. And let's try this out, see what happens. So let's hit render. Not sure if an IPR will actually work out too well for this, but well, it's worth a try. Let's see what happens. So yeah, here we go. Now we have, this rendered in 13 seconds. This massive amount of field, just a huge field of trees. And this is a pretty small resolution. I'm sure we can make it bigger and it wouldn't have as massive of an impact. But let's try an IPR. And let's actually find a cool camera angle. So now we've got the live IPR going. Let's get down somewhere low. Somewhere like this, maybe, and see what happens. Let's get a little lower, get closer, get some foreground trees. Okay, cool. We got a ton of trees and stuff going on. And we've got our physical sky, so let's actually edit the physical sky a bit. And so we'll click on the, oh, it's not here. Huh. Let's actually open this up. Let's actually delete this. I made the mistake of not connecting the physical sun and sky together. I should have clicked this, actually. So let's just delete that and create. And there we go. Okay, now we have proper lighting. And so yeah, you have this huge field, and it's just chewing right through it. So let's add some cool stuff. I don't know, maybe some atmosphere. Just create an atmosphere. Let's select our sun and make sure we've got some good intensity. The multiplier's okay. And everything looks pretty good. So let's actually adjust the volume contribution. So let's just crank this up to 1. And now we're getting the volume. It's just influencing the volume like crazy. So it's blowing out the volume that we have. So let's edit that. And let's get the scattering down to just something tiny, 0.001. So now we got subtle. It's a little more subtle, but that's still way too strong. 0.001. Yeah, that's as small as I can take it. So let's change the color. Something a little on the blue side. See how that looks once the IPR loads up a little. Let's go a little more into the blue. Desaturate it a bit. Okay, and now let's actually drop the volume contribution. So we'll just bring this down. So there's a little bit of volume contribution, but not tons. Let's try 0.1. And let's actually make a photographic exposure. Let's edit this. So let's crush some of the black a little bit. 0.25. Let's crank this up to 0.5. This just gives it a little bit of contrast. And okay, cool. Let's try to actually render something out and see how that looks. Let's pause that. Let's crank this up to 256.003. Let's increase the samples. Well, let's just do overrides, just it's faster. Let's do 128. And for the GI, you'll use brute force, Iridium's point cloud. We'll do 256. Now 512. Just go overboard, go a little crazy. And let's add a gig of memory. And let's actually try that out. Let's see how this looks. Let's go 1080p. And so we'll fire off a render and see what happens. With all this mesh geometry we got going on. Go 1:1. And so, I mean, just like that, that's how quick and easy it is to scatter thousands and thousands of proxies of whatever objects, you guys decide to use. This is great for environment stuff, so like trees and bushes and whatnot. And there's other tutorials on the web with MASH. I'll actually link to one that's pretty good that describes how you could better control your scatter using splines, painting stuff out with the texture painting in Maya. There's all kinds of ways to mask things out and use null locators to change the scaling. I mean, there's just tons of options. MASH is really, really powerful. And basically what's great about MASH is that it's pretty much universal. So you can use MASH with any rendering engine, and it connects with nParticles, so you could do a lot of really neat stuff. And so as you can see, this renders, I mean, rolling, just chewing through at 1080p with, a ton, a ton of trees. I have no idea how many trees, and all these trees they're shaded, they have double-sided materials, they're transparent for the leaves, there's backlighting on the leaves, there's normals on the leaves, normals on the bark, there's atmosphere on, and I mean, it's just going right through it. You could really get a sense of nice depth and all the trees and layering. And obviously, if I would import more different varieties and species, you get more variation, and the finished product will look a lot cooler. But considering this is just a basic test with this heavy amount of geometry, and it's steadily going through it.